Before you ever saw him, you heard him. It was a sound that didn't exist before, a sound like the sky tearing open. It was blues, it was rock, it was soul, it was the sound of the future arriving right now. And then you saw him. The wild hair, the psychedelic clothes, a guitar that seemed less like an instrument he was playing and more like a part of his own body. He would make it weep, make it scream, make it sing, and then he would smash it to pieces or set it on fire, as if the sounds he was creating were too powerful for any earthly object to contain. Jimi Hendrix. The name itself is a legend. For 4 brief incandescent years, he wasn't just the world's greatest guitarist, he was a cultural phenomenon, a shaman, a spaceman who seemed to have landed on Earth to show us what music could be. But the man who set his guitar ablaze at Monterey was the same man who was so shy he would often cover his face when he laughed. The electrifying showman who played with his teeth was the same boy who grew up in such poverty. He once used a broomstick as a pretend guitar. His story is one of the most surreal in all of music history. It's a story of almost supernatural talent emerging from profound trauma, a story of a gentle, wounded soul who became a psychedelic god. And it's a story that forces us to ask, where did it all come from? And why was he taken away so soon? This is not just the story of a rock star. This is the story of a genuine mystery. To understand the lightning strike that was Jimi Hendrix, you have to understand the world he landed in. The mid-1960s was a pressure cooker. America was a nation at war with itself. The buttoned-up conformity of the 1950s was cracking under the immense pressure of the civil rights movement, the escalating war in Vietnam, and a youth culture that was beginning to question everything. The air was thick with protest, with calls for love and peace, but also with the smoke of riots and the fear of the draft. And the soundtrack to this revolution was music. The polite pop songs of the early decade were being blown apart by the raw energy of the British invasion, the poetic rebellion of Bob Dylan, and the deep, authentic soul of Motown and Stax Records. Music wasn't just entertainment anymore. It was a weapon, a message, a way of life. But even in this era of explosive change, there were still lines you didn't cross. The music world was heavily segregated. You had white rock bands and black soul acts, and while they influenced each other, they rarely shared a stage and almost never a band. The electric guitar was becoming central to rock and roll, but its vocabulary was still being written. It was still mostly a tool for playing riffs and solos within the confines of a 3-minute song. The world was primed for a revolution, but no one could have possibly imagined the form it would take. No one was ready for a musician who would not just play music, but seemed to channel the very chaos and electricity of the age through his fingertips. The world was waiting for Jimi Hendrix. It just didn't know it yet. The man who would one day redefine the sound of the electric guitar began his life with almost nothing. He was born Johnny Allen Hendrix in Seattle, Washington in 1942, later renamed James Marshall Hendrix by his father. His childhood was a brutal landscape of poverty, neglect, and instability. His father, Al, was a struggling landscape gardener who had a difficult time holding down a steady job. His mother, Lucille, was a beautiful but troubled woman who battled alcoholism and was often absent from the family home for long stretches. Jimmy and his younger brother, Leon, were shuffled between relatives' boarding houses and cheap hotel rooms. They were often left to fend for themselves, sometimes going hungry. Jimmy was a shy, sensitive, and deeply introverted child, a stark contrast to the flamboyant icon he would become. He would carry a broom with him everywhere, pretending it was a guitar, sweeping it to keep up appearances, but privately strumming the imaginary strings, the music already alive in his head. His escape was his imagination. He was a voracious reader of science fiction, dreaming of other planets and alien worlds. He would draw fantastical pictures of spaceships and futuristic scenes. This fascination with the cosmic and the otherworldly would later become a central theme in his music, in songs like Third Stone from the Sun and 1983, A Merman I Should Turn to Be. His music was not just an escape from poverty, it was an escape from Earth itself. When he was just 5 years old, he found a one-stringed ukulele in the trash. It was his first real instrument. He taught himself to play, picking out melodies he heard on the radio. It was clear even then that he had a prodigious, almost inexplicable gift. The music was a lifeline, his only source of stability in a chaotic world. Tragedy was a constant companion. When Jimmy was 15, his mother, Lucille, died at the age of 32 from cirrhosis of the liver. Jimmy was not allowed to attend her funeral. His father reportedly gave him a shot of whiskey and told him to get over it. The loss of his mother, whom he adored, was a profound trauma that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He rarely spoke of her, but the pain fueled the deep, raw emotion that would later pour out of his guitar in torrents of sound. It was the birth of the blues in him, a sorrow too deep for words. At 15, he finally acquired his first real guitar, a $5 acoustic he bought from one of his father's friends. He was obsessed. He practiced constantly, playing until his fingers bled. He was left-handed, but the guitar was right-handed. Unfazed, he simply flipped it over and restrung it, teaching himself to play upside down and backward, a technique that would contribute to his unique sound and style. He was completely self-taught, learning by listening to blues records by greats like B.B. King, Muddy Waters, and Elmore James. He was absorbing the entire history of American roots music and preparing to blast it into the stratosphere. Jimmy's teenage years were aimless and troubled. After a couple of run-ins with the law for riding in stolen cars, a judge gave him a choice: 2 years in prison or join the Army. In 1961, he chose the Army. He was sent to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, the famed Screaming Eagles. The image of the psychedelic peace and love icon as a disciplined paratrooper is one of the most surreal in his life story. But the military was not for him. He was a terrible soldier, constantly daydreaming, falling asleep on duty, and thinking only of his guitar, which he had his father send to him. His fellow soldiers were a captive audience. One of them, a bass player named Billy Cox, recalled the first time he heard Jimmy play. He heard these incredible sounds coming from a bathroom and walked in to find Hendrix hunched over his guitar, lost in another world. They formed a band, and it quickly became clear where Jimmy's true talents lay. After just over a year of service, he was granted an honorable discharge on the grounds of an ankle injury sustained during a parachute jump, though it's widely believed his commanding officers were simply happy to be rid of a soldier who was, as one report put it, unsuited for the military. Freed from the Army, Hendrix, along with Billy Cox, plunged into the grueling world of the professional touring musician. This was the legendary Chitlin Circuit, a network of clubs and theaters throughout the American South and Midwest that were safe venues for black performers during the era of segregation. For the next few years, Hendrix was a hired gun, a sideman for a who's who of R&B and soul legends: Sam Cooke, Wilson Pickett, the Isley Brothers, and most famously, Little Richard and Ike and Tina Turner. This was his apprenticeship, and it was brutal. The pay was low, the travel was endless, and the band leaders were strict disciplinarians. Little Richard, a flamboyant showman himself, would fine Hendrix for being too flashy on stage or for wearing clothes that upstaged him. Ike Turner, known for his tyrannical control, also clashed with the young guitarist's burgeoning creativity. Hendrix was learning his craft, honing his skills, but he was also chafing at the restrictions. He was a supernova being forced to dim his light. He couldn't be contained in the background, playing simple rhythm parts. The sounds in his head were too loud, too strange, too revolutionary. He was fired from several bands for his wild playing and his refusal to stick to the script. He was a man out of time, waiting for his moment. By 1966, Hendrix had washed up in New York's Greenwich Village, a broke and unknown musician playing in small, dingy clubs under the name Jimmy James. But a revolution was about to begin. One night, a woman named Linda Keith, who was then the girlfriend of Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, saw him play. She was mesmerized. She saw the genius that no one else had recognized and made it her mission to get him a record deal. She brought producers and managers to see him, but they didn't get it. They thought he was too loud, too strange. Then she called Chas Chandler. Chandler was the bassist for the popular British band, The Animals, and he was looking to move into management and production. He came to the Café Wah to see this unknown guitarist. Hendrix launched into a frenetic, wild version of the song, Hey Joe. Chandler was floored. He knew in that instant that he was looking at the future. He told Hendrix he wanted to take him to London, the absolute epicenter of the music world at the time, and make him a star. Hendrix agreed on one condition. He wanted to meet Eric Clapton. It was a fateful partnership. Chandler brought Hendrix to London in September of 1966. He helped him change his name to the more exotic Jimmy, and he held auditions for a backing band. He found two young white English musicians, a wild powerhouse drummer named Mitch Mitchell, and a guitarist who agreed to switch to bass, Noel Redding. Together they became the Jimi Hendrix Experience, a power trio that would change the face of music. The impact on the London music scene was not like a ripple, it was like a tidal wave. London was filled with guitar heroes, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Pete Townshend, but they had never seen or heard anything like this. Chandler arranged for Hendrix to jam on stage at a concert by the supergroup Cream. Hendrix plugged into Clapton's amplifier and launched into a blistering version of a Howlin' Wolf song. Clapton, who was then universally considered God on the guitar, was seen standing by the side of the stage, his hands shaking, unable to light his cigarette. He was completely and utterly humbled. Word spread through the music world like wildfire. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, everyone came to see this unknown American who played the guitar like it was an extension of his nervous system. Pete Townshend of the Who said he was a wizard. He was so far in front of everyone, it was ridiculous. Paul McCartney was so blown away that he personally recommended the experience for one of the biggest music events of the decade, the Monterey International Pop Festival in California. In less than a year, Hendrix had gone from a broke, unknown sideman to the most talked-about musician on the planet. He had conquered London. Now it was time to conquer America. In June of 1967, the Jimi Hendrix Experience arrived at the Monterey Pop Festival. He was a huge star in the UK, but virtually unknown in his home country. That was about to change in one of the most legendary performances in music history. He walked on stage, a vision in psychedelic frills, and launched into a set that was pure, unadulterated electricity. The crowd, a sea of flower children, was stunned into silence. They had never heard a guitar make sounds like this, sounds that swooped and dived and screamed and exploded. And then came the finale. At the end of a wild, chaotic version of Wild Thing, Hendrix knelt before his Fender Stratocaster as if it were a sacred altar. He sprayed it with lighter fluid, kissed it goodbye, and set it on fire. He then smashed the burning instrument to pieces and threw the remains into the adoring crowd. It was a shocking, violent, and unforgettable act of rock and roll theater. It was his baptism by fire for America. The next day, Jimi Hendrix was a superstar. The years that followed were a whirlwind of superstardom. The Experience released a string of classic albums: Are You Experienced?, Axis, Bold as Love, and the monumental double album, Electric Ladyland. They toured relentlessly, playing to massive crowds across North America and Europe. Hendrix became the ultimate icon of the psychedelic era, his image everywhere, his music the soundtrack of the counterculture. But the pressure was immense. He was a shy, gentle man trapped in the persona of the wild man from Borneo, a role he was increasingly expected to play every night. The demands of touring, the constant travel, and the pressures of the music industry began to take their toll. He was also caught in a difficult racial crossfire. To the white rock audience, he was a psychedelic guru, but some in the Black Power movement criticized him for playing white music with a white band, accusing him of being a sellout. In reality, his music was a deep fusion of the entire black music tradition, blues, R&B, soul, with the volume and experimentalism of psychedelic rock. He was a bridge between worlds, and the weight of that bridge was heavy. The absolute peak of his fame, and perhaps his most profound artistic statement, came in the muddy dawn of August 18th, 1969. Hendrix was the final headlining act of the Woodstock Festival. Most of the 500,000-strong crowd had already left. He walked on stage with a new band and launched into a set that culminated in his now legendary interpretation of the Star-Spangled Banner. This was not a straightforward rendition. It was a sonic sculpture, a piece of protest art. Using feedback, distortion, and his whammy bar, he transformed the national anthem into a soundscape of the Vietnam War. You could hear the bombs falling, the planes screaming, the cries of the wounded, and the mournful notes of taps. It was a deeply patriotic and deeply critical statement, a plea for the soul of a nation that was tearing itself apart. It was a moment that perfectly captured the rage, the sorrow, and the fractured hope of a generation. It was arguably the single greatest performance in the history of rock music. After Woodstock, Hendrix seemed to be searching for a new direction. He was tired of the theatrics and the expectations of the Experience. He disbanded the original group and formed the all-black Band of Gypsies with his old army buddy, Billy Cox. He was also pouring his energy and his fortune into building his own dream studio in New York, Electric Lady Studios, a place where he could finally have complete creative control. But his final year was a period of confusion and exhaustion. He was caught between his old audience, who wanted the wild man, and his own desire to explore new musical territories, incorporating more funk, jazz, and soul. He was working constantly but seemed creatively adrift, under immense pressure from his management and hounded by legal and financial problems. The bright star that had burned so intensely was beginning to flicker. The last weeks of Jimi Hendrix's life are a sad, confusing story of exhaustion and aimlessness. In September of 1970, he was in London, at the end of a grueling European tour. He seemed unwell, tired, and depressed. On the evening of September 17th, he met up with a young German artist named Monika Dannemann, a woman he had only known for a few days. They spent the night at her apartment in the Samarkand Hotel. What happened in those final hours has been the subject of intense debate and controversy ever since. According to Dannemann's ever-changing story, she and Jimmy stayed up late, talking and sharing a bottle of wine. She claimed she later woke up to find that he had taken several of her powerful German sleeping pills, Vesperax. Seeing that he was unresponsive but seemingly breathing. She went out to buy cigarettes. When she returned, she found he had been sick and was in serious trouble. She called for an ambulance, but by the time Hendrix arrived at the hospital, he was gone. The official cause of death was asphyxiation, having inhaled his own vomit while intoxicated with barbiturates. He was 27 years old. The chaotic circumstances of his death have fueled endless speculation. Why did Dannemann wait so long to call for help? Were there other people in the apartment that night? Some, including his longtime girlfriend Kathy Etchingham, have accused Dannemann of negligence. Others have spun darker conspiracy theories involving murder by his manager or government agents. But the most likely truth is also the saddest, that it was a tragic, senseless accident, the result of exhaustion, confusion, and a deadly combination of alcohol and sleeping pills he was unfamiliar with. The most electrifying performer in the world had died a quiet, lonely, and undignified death. Jimi Hendrix was on the world stage for only 4 years. 4 years. In that impossibly short time, he completely and utterly revolutionized the way the electric guitar is played. He took an instrument and turned it into a symphony orchestra, a sound effects machine, a direct channel to the subconscious. He pioneered the musical use of feedback, distortion, and the wah-wah pedal, turning what were once considered technical problems into a new musical language. His influence is immeasurable. There is hardly a rock, metal, funk, or even jazz guitarist who came after him who does not bear his mark. From Prince to Stevie Ray Vaughan, from U2's The Edge to Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine, his DNA is everywhere. He was a true original, a visionary who saw possibilities that no one else could even conceive of. He remains the undisputed benchmark, the pinnacle of guitar genius, against which all others are measured. In the end, the story of Jimi Hendrix is a profound and heartbreaking paradox. He was a man who brought so much sound into the world, but who was, at his core, a shy, quiet, and gentle soul. He was a product of deep American trauma, poverty, racism, and neglect, who became a symbol of universal love and cosmic possibility. His stage persona was one of explosive, almost violent creative power, but his personal philosophy was one of peace and spiritual searching. He called his music electric church, a place where people could gather and be healed by the power of sound. The tragedy of his story is not just his early death, but the unfulfilled potential. He was just beginning to explore new musical frontiers. The studio he built, Electric Lady, was completed only weeks before he died. We can only dream of the music he would have created there, the albums he would have made in the 70s, 80s, and beyond. But perhaps it's a mistake to dwell on what was lost. Instead, we should marvel at what was given. For 4 short years, a shy boy from Seattle channeled something otherworldly and changed the world. He was a comet that blazed across our sky, and while his time here was brief, the light he left behind is still burning, still inspiring, and still showing us what it sounds like to be truly free. His music is not a relic of the past. It is and will always be an experience.